All right, so as I was saying, Moodle is updated. We had 7 100s on the test, a lot of A's, but it looks like it's a two-hump distribution. We have students who get it, and they're like, feed me, and then we have students who haven't quite got it yet. So what I'm asking is, students who haven't quite got it yet, we have one more test where the content's going to be the same, it's just different muscles. Questions will be the same, understanding how they pull and direction for it. So what I'm saying is try something different. Try to find study groups with students who are making hundreds and saying, what are y'all doing? What are you doing? I want to show me what you're doing. Okay? That's my suggestion, because a lot of times students will come to me and I always feel awkward. How should I study? How should I prepare? We're not the same person. But that's what I would do. If I was in a class and I saw there was a group of students who are acing it, I want to see how they study it. I want to see how they're looking at the questions. I want to see how they're interpreting the questions. So that's what I would do, okay? All of the lectures, I gave you guys a heads up. I posted all of the old lectures from previous classes. In other words, if you have time and you want to start going ahead, extra prep, you got all the material you need. And then in addition, I'm going to do what I do as we go down, okay? So we have our wrist, that's right here, but you have Unit 4, all the old lectures, and so Unit 4, and that's what I put 2024, so that's this semester. So that old lecture, I just repeated that one, so it's the same one. All right, so let's go to your wrist circle. I think the wrist is pretty straightforward, pretty basic. Remember from 310, the wrist doesn't twist. This stuff is going to be radial ulnar joint. So that's why your polar axis is not applicable. It's in A. The wrist doesn't move that way. So it's a very basic circle, because we don't have to worry about PE. We don't have to go outside and worry about spinning the merry-go-round. We're looking at sagittal pulls, flexion pullers, extension pullers, and then frontal pulls, ulna and radial deviators. And I'm going to remind us what the tricks I taught you in 310 were to differentiate between the two. Okay? Point of note, not every anterior crossing is an extension puller or a flexion puller. Remember, it comes down to getting in the fetal. What's going to get you in the fetal? And sometimes extension pullers are going to be anterior, but other times flexion pullers are going to be anterior, because it's all about what's going to get you into a ball. So don't try to memorize all the ones in the front, all the ones in the back. It depends on the joint. Okay? In the case of the wrist, anterior crossing muscles will be flexion pullers. This is going to get me into fetal. Okay? Posterior crossing muscles are going to be extension pullers. Because the wrist doesn't twist, this is great, the pinky will always be ulnar side, and the thumb will always be radial side. So I'm going to show you muscles that cross on the ulnar side. Those are going to be ulnar deviation pullers or ulnar deviators, and muscles that cross on the thumb side are going to be radial deviation pullers. In addition, I think everybody understands, whether you have a degree in kinesiology or not, this would be finger flexion and this would be finger extension. The fingers show you the flexion. The fingers follow the fingers to wrist flexion. And that rule applies because the wrist doesn't twist. So in other words, regardless of if I'm prone or whether I'm supine, just follow the fingers and the fingers will show you the flexion. Okay? So for our wrist circle, we're going to have flexion pullers, extension pullers, ulnar deviator, and radial deviator. Remember, this isn't all the muscles. These are the major muscles involved. We're leaving out a lot of intrinsic, little fine detail muscles that you need to do little fine detail stuff. Grad school, bless your heart, knock yourself out. In addition, I want you to understand that it takes a heck of a lot more force to hold on to things than it does to let things go. So in other words, if you were going to grab 2 buckets with 100 pounds, wouldn't it take more finger flexor pull to hold it than to let it? It doesn't take a lot of force to let something go, but it takes more force to grip it. So that makes sense why we have more flexion pullers in our fingers than we do extension pullers. To grip something, but it doesn't take a lot to let it go. Okay? This is something I've never done before, but I've done it for you guys. I hope it helps. I put all the functions. I listed them all. I used to not list them all in hopes that students would come to class and write it down. Nothing against them. Sometimes misunderstanding. I thought you said this. And so that there's no confusion, I'll put them up there for everybody, just like I did for you. Okay? Any questions about the breakdown of the circles? If you're a circler, great. If you're not, there's the information for you to make your list. We're going to have wrist flexors, wrist extensors, ulnar deviators, and radial deviators. That's it. And what you're going to find, this is so great. Like, I love when muscles are named like this. We're going to have some muscles that literally their pull is in their name. We're going to have muscles called flexor carpi ulnaris. What do you think that's going to do, right? We have extensor carpi radialis. Like, so the wrist is there. I wish all of the muscles would be named on their pull. But unfortunately, we just have some Timmys and Joeys and Brians and randomly Latin words that don't infer direction of pull, so that's what we got to do this next time. All right, I have a breakdown of how all these muscles, and again, this is on your Google, but how all these muscles kind of look collectively when they're all, think of it like this. If anybody's ever watched sports, you know, all the players are lined up, basketball, football, soccer, whatever. But then there's features where you can like eliminate all the players except just for the player you want to look at, like on a certain play. So I'm showing you kind of anterior and posterior how all of these players kind of look when they're all lined up on the field. And then we're going to look at them individually as we go down the line. Does that make sense? All right, you guys. Our first muscle, our palmaris longus. Remember, longus is a reference to the tendon length, the long tendon that pulls on the palm. I got no problem with that kind of wording. Pulls on the palm. I like to think of the palmaris longus as a Spider-Man muscle. Because you see how it makes like a little fan out to your metacarpals? I think of it like Spider-Man shooting a webbing, webbing going out into the palm. Now, we've done this enough. That muscle crosses the wrist in the front or the anterior. So what do you think its function is going to be at the wrist? A flexor, yeah. How do you think we're going to stretch that muscle at the wrist? Extend, outstanding. And some of the down the line things that we're going to do is, if we want to get our wrist maybe a little bit further, maybe we put these flexor things on slack and maybe we get a little bit further. Like little things like that we work on. But it's a flexion puller. Cool fact about the palmaris longus, it's absent in about 7 to 10% of the population. And so there's a little test you can do to see if you see that little tendon come into, you just put your thumb to your pinky, and if you got a little string that pops out, you got it. And if you don't have a little string that pops out, you may not. And just because the little string doesn't pop out doesn't mean you don't have it. Maybe your string's a little deep. It's just a cool little test to see if you have a palmaris longus. Guys, notice how this muscle is, when it crosses, because remember, function is about how you cross. It's not origin, not insertion, how you cross. Do we agree that this muscle crosses like in the middle of the wrist? Right? So in other words, it's not on the ulna side or the radial side, one side, other side, right in the middle. And that's why in your circle it's sitting tense. Cross in the middle. you're going to have a lot of wrist muscles that have origins on the distal humerus. Do they cross the elbow? Yes, but remember how the iliotibial band crossed the elbow almost directly laterally, so it was more like a stabilizer to lateral motion than it was a mover. And that's kind of what these muscles, crossing the elbow laterally, helps to create extra stability for our elbows, just like these kind of muscles that cross laterally help to create extra stability for our knees. Okay? Just in case you're wondering. We have two major sets of extrinsic. Extrinsic just means they come from outside. Intrinsic means they were all inside. So you got little intrinsic movers, and you got extrinsic, bigger, more powerful movers. I'm just giving you the extrinsics. You have two sets of finger flexors. Once again, it makes sense, man. You have to have more force to hold on to things than to let things go. You have superficialis, and guys, flex it in between finger flexors. That's all they mean. You have a finger flexor superficialis and a finger flexor profundus. How these work are really, really cool. The superficialis, if you zoom in to your Moodle picture, notice the little slits. You see these little like slits, these little almost like wishbone, these little U's. You see those little U's? So the superficialis doesn't go to the tips of your fingers. They kind of stop right here. And they create these little tunnels for the profundus muscle tendon to pass right through and go to the tip of your finger, which I think is really cool. So these guys create a little tendinous tunnel. And then watch how the profundus, look at that. You see the profundus just go straight to the tip? Like, how brilliant is that? Where you have two sets of finger flexors, because it takes a lot of force to grip heavy things. One of them pulls with the creation of a little tunnel, and the one that goes further is the car that passes through the tunnel to go all the way to the end, to the tip of the fingers. I think that's really, really cool. Now, if you're saying, Campbell, how do these finger pullers influence wrist motion? Well, to get to the fingers, you got to cross the wrist. I'm going to let you finish writing because I want you to see this. Because this is why I get paid the small bucks. If I attached a string to my distal finger and I pulled, this is what's going to happen. Finger flexion. If I keep pulling, wrist flexion. If that muscle crossed the elbow to get there, if I kept pulling, elbow flexion. And if that muscle crossed the shoulder to get there. So the fact that it got to the fingers while passing the wrist in the front is what makes it a wrist flexor. And that kind of makes sense if you're holding things and it's trying to extend you and you need flexors, right? To grip and to hold, you need some extra flexors in. So yes, it's finger flexors. But they're extrinsic. They come from outside of the wrist. And to get to the fingers, they cross the wrist in the front. So that's why they're wrist. I love the little tunnel. That's just so cool. And then the profundus just slips right underneath it to the distal phalanx. All right, does everybody see how, relatively speaking, both of these finger flexors are very in the middle of class? Okay. Watch this experiment, how cool. You take your forearm, try to relax it, and squeeze on the meaty part of your arm, and sometimes your fingers, more the distal works better. Sorry. Notice how your fingers will curl in. See that? So in other words, you're squeezing outside of your hand, but yet your fingers are curled because those muscles pass through there to get to the finger. Just to kind of show you that. Do you think your finger flexors are going to be stronger or weaker than your extensors? I kind of said it earlier, but Just want to make sure. Absolutely. Let's do this experiment. Straighten your fingers out. Put them on the table. Straighten your fingers out. Now relax your hand and watch what happens. You see how they flex? That's telling me that the tone, the resting tone of your flexors is much more than the resting tone of your extensors. Relax. See? Which again makes sense. It takes a lot more force to grab onto something than it does to let it go. We're gripping things all the time. All right, guys, I put 2 for 1 on this picture just because I love the way it separated them. But these are so easy. Finally, we have muscles that have their function in their name. Flexor, carpi. Carpi is just word for carpal bones. So it's a wrist flexor that pulls on your carpal bones. So we know it's going to be in the front. And it's on my ulnar side. So that means it's going to pull in the direction of ulnar deviation. Or my other one's on my radial side, so it's going to pull in the direction of radial deviation. These are the kind of muscles that I like. There's no, what job does Bobby have? Oh, he's a fireman. Nah, it's Fireman Bobby. That's the kind of word, that's the kind of name I like. Because it has the function in the name. Okay? So this would be our axis. Yoink. So I think it's cool that here you have our flexor mass are all tend to start in the same origin area. Our extensors, our mobile wad on the outside of the same area. Usually because from a nerve standpoint, usually going to recruit either the flexors or the extensors. So it helps from miscommunication. But here's a great example of 2 muscles that have a similar origin. But when they get to the wrist, one's more on the radial side, one's more on the ulnar side. So that's why one pulls this way and the other pulls that way. That's kind of cool. Same origin, but one pulls this way and the other pulls that way. It kind of looks like this, guys. My 2 fingers represent how each of them cross respectively. Both of them do this. Ulnar side pulls this way, radial side pulls that way. Ulnar deviation pull, radial deviation pull. Flexor carpi ulnaris, ulnar deviation pull, radial deviation. When they're working together, awesome. They can cancel out frontal, just like our sternocleidomastoids, or cancel out frontal, pull together sagittal. So again, if we look at it in terms of origin and insertion, that doesn't tell us that one is a radial deviation puller and one is an ulnar deviation puller. Origin and insertion might be important for some of you guys in grad school when you're palpating injuries and doing stuff, but in terms of working muscles and knowing what they do, it's all about how they cross. It's all about the crossings. Man, keep the momentum going. Look what we got here, an extensor carpi ulnaris. We had a flexor carpi ulnaris, and now we got an extensor carpi ulnaris. Both functions given in the name. Watch me, guys. Watch me. What's that song? Watch me. Is that a song? My kids say that all the time. Check this out. My 2 flexors cancel out, right? What's the same concept now for this? You have a flexor carpi ulnaris and an extensor carpi ulnaris, and they can work together to pull in the direction of ulnar deviation, canceling out sagittally and working together frontally. Like if you had a hammer and the hammer was on the back side and you were going to use this as an exercise, the hammer's trying to radial deviate me, so I'm going to be using my ulnar deviators. I'm trying to hit the hammer into the ground, into the nail, and I need to use my ulnar deviators concentrically to get that last whip. Flexor and extensor carpi ulnaris, pull in the direction of ulnar. Like I said, these muscles, chef's kiss, because they have the function in the name. Is this a posterior view or an anterior view of my lower arm? Good. Yeah, I see that olecranon. Yeah, I don't see the pisiform. So I just want to make sure we see why it's an extensor, because it's crossing in the back. Posteromedial, as a fancy term. Uh-oh, we got extensor carpi vulnaris. What do you think's coming up next? You can do it. You can do it. Extensor carpi. Yes! Now, technically you have a longus and a brevis, but they're sister muscles. Remember what we did for the iliopsoas? We just call it one muscle, even though we have an iliacus and psoas. So for this class, we're just going to call it the extensor carpi radialis. Even though there's a longus and a brevis, they have the same functions. So for the test, we're going to simplify it. Guys, this is the muscle that is irritated for tensility. This is the tensility muscle. Why do I know that? Because I did a 175-page dissertation on it. With dyslexia, that was not fun. But I'll take 30 seconds to give you the synopsis of my dissertation. We grip things all the time. We squeeze things, we grip things. Most people with tennis elbow don't play tennis, but they're gripping things. Your finger flexors cross the wrist to get to the fingers, true? So anytime you grip something, those finger flexors are also trying to flex your wrist. Well, if you don't want your wrist to flex and you want to maintain a neutral grip posture while you're gripping, extensors have to turn on to counter that moment, to counter that torque. In other words, if you squeeze your fingers, you're going to feel some muscles kick on laterally. Now, usually when you turn on a muscle, it's conscious. This is an involuntary thing to keep your wrist in neutral. Remember we said the finger flexors are stronger? They're also more fatigue resistant than our extensors. So your finger flexors are like, come on, dude, let's go, let's go, let's go. And our extensors are just like, I'm exhausted, I'm tired. And so tennis elbow isn't about wrist motion, it's about grip and how squeezing things automatically trigger your extensor mass to neutralize the wrist in a neutral posture. So as long as you're gripping, those extensor muscles are working. And if they work too much, they get tired and fatigued. And they let you know. They let you know they're tired and fatigued. But I guess they got to call the condition something, so they call it tennis elbow.
So in the sense of, yes, the flexors are moving, but when we activate those extensors, they're working with the flexors.
The extensors are working to keep the wrist in a neutral position, right? Because when you do this,
You want this, but you have to pull it.
mm-hmm. Yep. This is another view of the extensor carpi radialis, longus and brevis. So guys, look at your circles or look at your list that I gave you. Notice I didn't differentiate brevis and longus because they have the same functions. So to try to simplify it, to try to make this class as least difficult as we can, and so many muscles, we're just going to group them as the ECR, extensor carpi radialis. Grad school, you'll do the separation. Well, we got things to squeeze the fingers. We got to have something to let it go. Your extensive digital one. You only need one, because again, it don't take a lot of force to let something go. That makes sense? Think about it. When have you ever done resistance exercises on your extensive? All right? Just have to have something to release. Extensor digits. But to get to those digits, you got to cross the wrist. And function is, how do you cross in the back? That'd be kind of cool. You go in the weight room, you take like a rubber band, you're like, just doing some finger extension. In therapy, though, we do some of those webbing. We can do some, because sometimes there's some imbalance because you never really work them, and sometimes you need to get in there and work them. So there are ways to do it. We just don't do it often in nature. Guys, that's it. So let's go back to our circles, and then we'll do some practice concepts. The wrist is pretty straightforward and easy. Again, no PE. Sagittal, flexion and extension. Anterior crossing muscles are going to be flexion pullers. Posterior crossing muscles are going to be extension pullers. Medial crossing muscles are going to be ulnar deviation pullers. Lateral crossing muscles are going to be radial deviation pullers. If we want to go for a stretch, how would I stretch my flexors? I want to make sure I extend my wrist. Okay. If I want to get my finger flexors, I want to make sure my fingers are extended. But if I put them on slack, I might be able to go a little bit further because that's going to be a limiting factor. Let me show you the limiting factor of your fingers. I think this is really cool. Does everybody have a pen or something to write with? Let's do this quick experiment. Neutral wrist posture. Squeeze that pin as far as you can. Right? Pretty good grip strength there. Now, wouldn't it make sense as I flex, I'm going to be stretching all these extensors, right? It's like having tight hamstrings. So watch what we're going to do now. Flex your wrist as much as you can. Now try to squeeze. Flex it as much as you can, and then try to squeeze. You don't squeeze as much, huh? Because literally you're stretching those extensors so much that they're pulling your fingers away from the pin. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. I'll show you one more party trick. So your fingers are a little different than your toes because we have all this dexterity that we have to do. So you have independent little intrinsic muscles for your thumb, for your pointer, for your pinky. Intrinsic so that they can move by themselves. You can do all this little stuff. Not important in our class, we're looking at the major, bigger extrinsic muscles. But let me show you this little trick. You take a piece of paper or your pen, you can use your pen, I guess, if you want, and put it in between your ring fingers. Okay. Try to sandwich it in between your ring fingers. Okay. You may have to put it vertical. There you go. You may have to put it vertical. Okay. This is to show you that you have independent fingers or independent little strings for different digits, but not your ring fingers. We're going to make a bridge. If I can do it right. We're going to make a bridge with our middle fingers. Okay? Keep the bridge connected. Try to release the pin. Keep your fingers together. Keep your bridge connected. Try to extend your ring finger to let go. Now, you could do it with your pinky. You could do it with your pointer. You could do it with your thumb. Kind of cool, huh? All right, I hope y'all win some money this weekend doing these little party tricks. All right, what about some exercises? Radial deviators or ulnar deviators? This is a dumbbell. Radial deviator or ulnar deviators? What would I need to maintain this position? Good. Yeah. Gravity's trying to do this. Wouldn't I need radial deviation pullers? True? Okay. What about something like this? Would I need flexors or extensors? Absolutely. Yoink. Yoink. Once you identify the group based on understanding who you need to pull, then your circles or your lists help you to identify those specific muscles. So in the case of my radial deviators, my flexor carpi radialis and my extensor carpi radialis. In the case of my wrist extensors, my extensor carpi ulnaris, my extensor carpi radialis, and my extensor digitorum. Okay. If I reversed it and I needed flexors, well, my flexor carpi radialis, my flexor carpi ulnaris, my palmaris longus, and my flexor digitorum superficialis, and my flexor digitorum profundus.
What about if you were, like, actually like working up and down,
Mhm.
still use this flexor?
You would, well, the motion would be elbow, so you would be using elbow influencers for the motion, but your wrist flexors would still be working to provide a rigid link, right? They'd still be working isometrically to keep your wrist in a fixed position. Does that make sense?
So yes, it's at the elbow, but going down with the gravity wanting to take that weight down,
Mm-hmm.
and you having to keep that
Mhm.
steady position in your wrist,
Mm-hmm.
you'd still need the
The wrist flexors, and they would be working isometrically the whole time because my wrist wouldn't have motion.
And same thing if we were doing the opposite way.
It would be wrist extensors the whole time, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the limiting factors. If you've ever noticed how like reverse grip stuff is a little bit harder to do than a prone grip, it's because the bar isn't going to push through the palm of your hand. But if you reverse grip, the bar could slip through the grip of your fingers. Does that make sense? See if I could find a couple exercises that we can practice. Yeah.
What about in a situation like you just set the dumbbell with holding it here? Yes, these are, we would need the regular views.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the flexors would go, would we
Mm-hmm.
take that into account, or would just be those regular?
Because there's no external force in my wrist sagittal. If I had a TheraBand that was trying to do this, then I would need this. But here, gravity's trying to do this, so therefore I need this. Make sense? Good question. All right, you guys, what am I stretching right here? Flexors or extensors? Good, absolutely. The position, I'm in an extended position, so I'm going to stretch all the things that pull in the direction of flexion. Let's see if we can do TheraBand. Nice, man. Hey, she seems happy. Perfect. Look at all these things. Let's start with here we go. I'm going to try to make it bigger. Yoink. Flexors or extensors? You don't have to answer right away, just give it some thought. Absolutely. TheraBand is trying to flex you. True. Left to right, concentric or eccentric? Concentric. Right to left, concentric or eccentric? Eccentric. The TheraBand is trying to do the same motion in my wrist, so I need the muscles the same to try to do opposites in my wrist. Same external force, same group of muscles. The differences in the motion, the differences in contraction. Concentric extensors making me extend, eccentric extensors letting me flex. Your circles or your lifts just help remind you where those muscles, that's all. And fortunately, not unfortunately, our wrist muscles have function in those names. Right? Extensor carpi radialis, extensor carpi ulnaris, and our extensor digits.
Say she was to hold from the first picture, say she was to pull and not go all the way up like she was in the second picture, and hold here.
Mm-hmm.
She would need both.
She would still need the same muscles. She would still need her extensor muscles, but then when she'd hold it, they're just working isometrically. She's probably not, the way the band is pulling straight down, there's probably no flexion moment where she starts. But we know gravity's not trying to make her hand go up, right? So she's gonna have to use those extensors to make it extend. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, that's a good way to find another one. Just pull up the same picture. Ooh, here's a good one. Yoink. Yoink. Frontal plane. Are we looking at radial deviators or ulnar deviators? Good, good. TheraBand's trying to ulnar deviation, so I need radial deviators, muscles that pull that way. You establish who you need to pull, then reference your circles or your lists to say, well, who are the muscles that pull that way? My radial deviators, flexor carpi radialis and extensor carpi radialis. The difference in motion isn't because of different muscles. The difference in motion is because the same muscles doing different contractions. Radial deviators are going to make radial deviation happen through concentric. Radial deviator is going to let ulna happen through eccentric. You see how it's rinse, wash, repeat? Because that's how muscles work. That's really cool. That's really cool.
So the agonist in that situation would still be with radial deviators? That's
Uh-huh.
what we had to.
This is really cool. I like this one a lot. Let's see if we can figure it out. I'm going to send this one to my major professor at Auburn. All right, guys, let's do a thought experiment. I'm assuming or I'm going to infer that piece of foam is straight when it's just laying on the ground, right? This person has to grab the other end and bend it into that position on the picture. Does that make sense? So in other words, that rubber tube is trying to get back to being straight. So the question is, what muscles of his wrist bend? The little stick, the radial deviators. Hold on. Does that make sense? You grab onto the end and you bend it with radial deviation, using your radial deviator. That's kind of cool. That's a cool piece of rehab equipment. Does that make sense? Does it make sense that the bar is literally trying to go straight, trying to ulnar deviation? So you don't need your ulnar deviators. You throw it back. You need your radial deviators to make it bend concentrically, and then the same muscles to let it go back eccentric. Radial deviators are going to make your radial deviate, the same muscles are going to let you ulnar deviate. That's really cool.
This is a hypothetical, just
I
more
love
out of
it.
curiosity, but is there any exercises where you could specifically isolate a flexor radial deviator?
Mm-hmm. This is what you would have to do. You would have to do a combinational external force. So, in other words, the TheraBand, let me get in front of the camera. So the question was, can you isolate a flexor radial deviator? I love that question because it's really applicable. Like, okay, who is a flexor radial deviator? Flexor carpi radialis, right? Okay. So we would need an external force that's trying to extend us and an external force that's trying to ulnar deviate us. So in other words, instead of taking that TheraBand or that manual resistance and going linear, you would go at an angle to try to do a combination of extension and ulnar deviation at the same time. So therefore, this muscle would be trying to flex and radial deviate at the same time. That's how you would do it. It would be similar in saying, is there any way to isolate my right sternocleidomastoid? Well, yeah, it's trying to do this and it's pulling this. So what if I tried to do this and this at the same time? Then that muscle would really be pulling, right? Great question. So we would just need a combo external force in two different planes. Really good question.
Looking at the fingers, is it the extensors and finger extensors that are really for this?
Why just look at the figures?
Great question. So just working on just getting the fingers, you would want your finger flexors. But I'll tell you why, because something has to push on that tube to make it bend, right? So in other words, if I said, hey, finger extensors, activate, you'd actually let go. Does that make sense? So another way we can look at it is, this tube is trying to extend your fingers, right? Because isn't it pushing out like this? So I wouldn't need my extensors, I want to use my finger flexors to maintain that grip. Make sense? It's a great question. Great question. And, you know, there's no rule that says you can't use your finger flexors when you're using your extensors. That's the whole point of, honestly, tennis elbow, is because there's kind of this contraindication of, I need grip, but I also need extensors. Do y'all remember in physiology, reciprocal inhibition of antagonistic muscles? You remember that? When one group turns on, it shuts the others off. So if I have my extensors as options, digits, flexor, and extensor carpi, well, if I'm gripping, wouldn't it make sense that it would want to send an inhibition to the, so that's one less muscle that can help neutralize my wrist. That's why those others compensate even more, because they don't have help from the finger extensors, because they're being hit. That's a good one. Just try to, oh, there's one that I usually ask on the test. Don't y'all love test questions? If y'all don't, I don't like to say it. Stop. And attack. Okay, that's radioulna. Radioulna. And there was one. Well, this is kind of cool. This says kind of all of them. We have to be careful because radioulna joint is not wrist. So that's why I didn't go to, man, this is a great one. Kind of has a lot of everything. Extensors. True. I would need my extensors. So when I observe extension, concentric. When I observe flexion, eccentric. I'm here. Gravity's trying to radial deviate me. So I would need ulna deviators, top right. True. So when I see ulnar deviation, concentric. When I see radial deviation, eccentric. Top right. Here's my thumb. Thumb side is always radial. So if my teeter-totter is here and I got more stuff on this side, just trying to do this. So I need ulnar deviator. Top right, ulnar deviators. Bottom left, ulnar deviators. I don't know why they tried to trick us like that. If I did want to work radial deviators, and this is what's great about me trying to teach you to be clinicians, because eventually you're going to have to learn how to use your skill set to create environments to work certain things. Guys, all we got to do is just shift the dumbbell, right? In other words, the dumbbell is more on my radial side, so all I got to do is just shift it where the dumbbell is now more on my ulnar side. That's all I got to do to work different muscles. Shift that dumbbell's weight so that it's trying to ulnar deviate me, and then I would need radial deviators. Make sense? So top right and bottom left working the same muscles. They can't trick me, well, sometimes, but not in this way. Bottom right, flexors. True? And if you notice, I'm not asking you about specific muscles because I just introduced you to those today. You'll learn those. That's geography, guys. It's like learning your parishes and your county seats. You can learn that overnight. And more important is understanding who I need to pull because I see why I need to pull them. Any questions on why I need extensors? Go ahead.
Not on this picture, but I remember in 310 for test 4, we had the questions like hitting a mosquito, where obviously you don't want to use your agonist to work concentrically certain. I'm trying to think of that.
So with the mosquito, you would actually want to use the agonist in the same direction of gravity. Because if there's a mosquito biting me, I don't want to use eccentrics of the flexors to let my shoulder extend. I want to use my extensors to make my shoulder extend faster than what gravity can offer.
Could we be responsible for something like that on this test? Like what muscles would be?
I'm going to ask the same, and it's my way of trying to simplify things. I used to do that, but I'm literally just trying for us to understand, and us, just as a class, this is bicep, and this is bicep, right? So I'm really just putting it to function, exercises. Those examples are rare, right? So I think that if I try to toss a couple of those, it would confuse some people. And that's how dedicated I am to just trying to stay on. But those kind of questions all day, because I want to make sure we're on the same page. All right, we're good? All right, y'all have a good one. I'll post the elbow and radial ulna joint. Just a heads up, elbow and radial ulna, even though they're separate joints, they're going to be in the same circle because they live in the same apartment complex. We've already had that with the ankle and subtalar. Because you're going to have a lot of muscles that influence both. So I just want to give you a heads up.